Hi, everyone. This video will discuss section 7. We're going to hit a few topics here. We're going to talk specifically in this video about arcs, ARCS, and we'll also talk about hierarchical relationships as well as recursive relationships. Now, here's an area where if you're doing computer science, you may have covered some of these topics in other areas, and it's going to be very similar. But before we even talk about it, let's talk about this idea of exclusive relationships, which are going to be a key part of our arcs. So, an exclusive relationship, it's represented as an exclusive or if you were doing like circuitry, it would be shown up as an XOR. That's the way we would note it. But that basically means that one or the other, not both. And it's a little different than like if you're doing programming and you have a traditional or statement. Um, if I say if it's raining or it's cold outside, bring a jacket. It could be raining and cold. Both of those conditions could be true. An exclusive or is kind of more where only one of those things can be true. So, for example, is it sunny or rainy? Um, I mean, throw out the idea of it could be a sun shower where it's raining and sunny. But the idea is that you have one or the other, and it can't be both of those things. So that's an exclusive or where only one of the conditions can be true. So let's look at an example where um, this is similar to a company I used to work with. They had the ability for us to teach courses remotely. And the courses would either be taught by an in-house employee or they would be taught by a consultant. So the way that that would look, if we model that, is going to be something like this. Now, before we get into the arc over there, let's just take a look at the two tables here. We have this table here that's going to talk about a contractor taught course. And you can see it has a contractor ID. And, imagine somewhere over there, we have a contractor table. We have a class ID. We have a maximum class size, and we have a billing rate. So how much are we paying this contractor for the course? Likewise, we have an employee taught course. Now, they don't need a billing rate because they're an employee. You figure they're, being paid to do this. You don't have to pay them separately for it. And you can see that instead of having an employee or a contractor ID, they have an employee ID. They also then have a class ID and they have a class size. So at the particular company I was working at, the one of the things that they would do is if it's something that an employee was teaching, they would allow the course size to be a little larger. So if we had a contractor, you might limit it, let's say, to 15. If it was one of our employees where, this is their full-time job and they're spending time in the afternoon, supporting students and so on, maybe that becomes a class size of 20. And by having these things in separate tables, you can apply separate rules. For example, a class size of 15 for this contractor taught class table, and a class size of 20 maximum for the employee taught class. But you can see both of these are going to be related to a class table. Now, this notation, this little fellow right here is what we call the arc. That's going to be that curved line. And again, when I was in college, they taught us circuitry, and this was, very similar to how you would do circuitry. So um, this O on both ends is going to indicate that this is an exclusive or. So what that means is a class has a start date and end date, and its instructor is going to be either a contractor or an employee, one, but not both. And that's what this is indicating. Now let's take a look at this relationship because I know sometimes the relationships can be a little confusing. If this were one table, get rid of this for a moment and everything here. So we were looking at the table this way with the uh, dashed and solid lines. What this means is a contractor could teach. You see, this half is optional, so that would be 0 to many classes. Again, if you Google this, you will find 40 different ways to do this. But this is basically saying you can either do, and they could do 0 or many classes. Now, if they had to teach a class, this would be a full solid line. So that's why this first, the stuff on the right-hand side of the screen is dashed, because the contractor does not have to teach a class. Now, flipping it around over here, class must have an instructor. And if we were doing it just the simpler way, it would be a contractor. So when we introduce the arc, there we go. It's very similar. An employee can teach 0 or more classes. A contractor could teach 0 or more classes, but a class must be taught by someone. And that's why from the middle over, kind of facing back the other way, from here to here, it's solid, which is going to indicate that going in that direction is mandatory. So class must have an instructor. I don't care if it's a contractor or an employee. It must be one of those. And that's what the arc is doing here. It's allowing us to effectively split, that relationship, that requirement. So class has an instructor. We see this half mandatory. And then we see the arc, and what that's basically doing is saying, okay, well, it can be A or B. You could turn left or you could turn right. It doesn't matter to the database, but it has to be one of those two things. So, and again, over to the right, you might have a separate employee table. You might have a separate contractor table. Over on the other side of the class, there might be more tables representing class curriculum or lessons or so on. But effectively, what this allows us to do is, instead of saying it must be taught by somebody and kind of saying, okay, a contractor and employee must all be in one table, it allows you to maybe set things up a little differently. So in our case, I tried to keep it relatively simple, just the optional billing rate there. And just realizing we should have those stars there. So, but yes, so, and actually in this case, the billing rate would be, I would assume mandatory. You want to know how much you're paying someone. But class ID, class size, which again, you could set a database rule to say the maximum for the contractor table is 15. The maximum for the employee taught is 20. Now, the second part of the chapter, the sections here, talk about hierarchical and recursive relationships. And I wanted to hit the recursive relationships a little more, just because that's something that is a little more common. So let's say we have an employee table. We have an employee ID, first and last name, and a manager ID, keeping it simple here. Now, if you have a cat, you understand that you are not in charge. You might take a nap and then somebody decides they want food, and you are absolutely going to get up and feed the cat, right? So in this case, if we say my cat, she has no manager assigned to her, but I do have a manager, and that's my cat. And we would use a recursive relationship to represent that someone in this table can be supervised by somebody else in this table. And we would use a notation that's going to look like this to do that. So this, I don't know who did all this stuff, but you got crow's feet, you got pig's ears. This is what we call a pig's ear to represent that. And what this is going to indicate that And we would label this manages and managed by if we were labeling. But the idea here is that an employee can be managed by another employee. And this is really should be a manager ID, but this would effectively loop back and cover that relationship. So what that allows me to do is it allows me to go back and say, okay, well, this person's manager is A001. We look that up, and as expected, it would be the cat. So, we could look at mandatory if somebody has to manage somebody or somebody has to have a manager. If we were to put somebody else in, you could see in this case, the hierarchical relationship can be reconstructed. So my daughter is managed by me and, of course, my wife. And then I am managed by the cat. And you can see that hierarchy being represented because you could say, well, person A003 is managed by A002, A002 is managed by A001, and A001 is managed by no one. But again, the reason this is going to be dashed, just like your straight lines, is because we would assume it is optional that someone does not have to have a manager and someone does not have to be a manager. So somebody doesn't have to be a manager. Somebody doesn't have to manage people necessarily. So if you see this weird notation, what that just means is it's related to itself. You use one field in the table and you match it to a different field in the same table. And this is how you might use that to look that up. And another example might be, let's say we're talking about advising, where maybe you have a faculty advisor or someone who might be, looking after your academic curriculum. So very similar. And we might say, there's your student ID. And we have Nelson here, and his advisor is the advisor ID is 8675309. If you get that reference, it's an old song. So we have this advisor, and maybe that would have a lead 0 just to match there. And this would allow you to say, how do you match, how do you keep information about both students and faculty in the same table? And again, very similarly, you could have first, last, maybe social security number, address, demographic information, race, gender, ethnicity, etc. You keep that all in one table. And then you could form this type of relationship where we look this up here and we match that to some other column. So that's that idea of a recursive relationship. And we talk about recursive. It's if you're doing programming, it's when a program, like let's say a function can call itself. That's in programming called recursion. So again, if you've done some computer science classes, you may have run into that topic there. So that's section 7. Hopefully this helps clear things up, and see you in a future video. Take care.